Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. My name's Duane Osterland. I'm your host, and today we have a great guest, Brandon Simpson. This guest is really important to me because he is one of our providers at Novus Mindful Life Institute, and I've been able to work personally with Brandon and watch him take his experience and work with people and help them move to the next level in their life. Brandon is an associate marriage and family therapist, and he received his undergraduate degree in psychology from New York State and received his graduate degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University in Los Angeles. And he specializes in helping the LGBTQ community and specifically working with people who are struggling with out-of-control sexual behavior. And it's been my pleasure to work with him as a colleague. Brandon really believes that therapy is a collaborative process. And when people are seeking therapy, it's because they either need support or want to make a change in their life, and they feel like they need a space to talk. And I can tell you, as a therapist, Brandon is able to do that and guide people through these difficulties. So I'm glad he's coming onto the podcast to share his wisdom and his experience. So I know you'll get a lot out of this episode. And if you're getting a lot out of the Addicted Mind podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. That would be really awesome. Really appreciate it. And you can also join our Facebook group. Go to Facebook and type in the Addicted Mind podcast, click join. All right, let's jump into this episode. All right, everybody, welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. I have a great guest, Brandon Simpson. We are going to talk about sex addiction in the gay community, what that means, how people work with that, and the importance of discussing that. So, Brandon, jump in, introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about you and why you do this work.
Yeah, well, good morning. Thank you for having me, Duane. Like you said, my name is Brandon. I am an associate marriage and family therapist, so I see patients in a therapeutic setting. I'm also a trained sex addiction therapist, so I am trained to be able to look at people's sexual patterns, their sexual beings and stuff like that, and be able to help people really understand that aspect of them. And I think this is a really important topic because when we talk about sex addiction, or compulsive sexuality, compulsive sexual behaviors. As you know, there's 1,000,001 different names for it.
Right.
Gay men, to me, I feel like are always left out of the conversation. When I went through the training to become a certified sex addiction therapist, we spent a lot of time on heterosexual relationships and how men and women interact and how compulsive sexuality, or whatever you want to call it, plays a role in those relationships. But relationships between gay men, I think it was like a quick 2, 3, 4 hour piece of the training, and then we moved on.
Right.
So I think it's really great to be able to talk about this, because even though gay men and everything have their own culture and everything, this is still a problem within the community that I think should be brought to light.
And talked about and opened up. That's definitely true. So tell me a little bit about you and getting into the mental health field and why this is important to you.
Yeah, so I originally got into mental health because, as you know, I didn't grow up in Southern California. I actually grew up in upstate New York, very rural New York.
Rural New York.
Rural New York. And growing up there and being a gay man, it was very isolating. Not a lot of resources. You know, people took the LGBT community based off of what they saw on television, the news, the rhetorics that people have been spreading around for years. And so it was very isolating growing up in high school. And so when I finally went away to college, that's when I made the choice to be able to provide that space to people so that the isolation doesn't feel so big and people don't feel so alone.
Yeah, and that would be such a lonely place as a kid growing up. And this is, you're only probably seeing it through the lens of the media. You're not seeing examples of healthy sexuality. And so all you have is this one message.
Yeah, when you go through, we had to go through in my school basically like a marriage counseling class where you talk about relationships and you talk about, rearing children and everything like that. And it is all based on a heteronormative lens. So I remember going through there being like, yeah, well, this is nice. It's good
I
to
don't
know.
fit here.
But this doesn't talk. And of course, where I'm from, it was very abstinent based. So don't have sex until you're married. Don't have sex until you have a committed relationship. But they don't talk about building those relationships to have a sense of healthy sexuality with yourself.
Right. Right. I mean, I think that's part of our culture too, right? We don't talk about sex. Sex is something that is to be feared or is something to not talk about or is only through this lens is the only way in which we can discuss it.
Yeah. And anything outside of that lens is, as well as you know what pretty well, that's what produces shame in our patients.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
be able to have them look at themselves in a very specific light and as an outcast because they don't fit that very specific lens.
Right. Yeah. And the reality is, even when we look at the research, our sexuality as human beings is so diverse and so unique to everyone that to have these kind of standardized rules or whatever they are, leads to a lot of shame, which is actually for someone probably pretty normal.
Yeah. And it's that otherness that kind of tend to perpetuate the addictive, the compulsivity piece of sexuality, sex, and sexual behaviors, because they don't think it fits into that range of quote unquote range of normal. And it then is the driving force for them.
Right. And as your experience, if you're in a space that only speaks to this one subset of sexuality and you're like, wait, I don't quite fit there. This feels really, it doesn't feel good because, everybody's saying this, but I don't feel that way.
Yeah. And I think it even takes it a step further that when you tell someone you're part of the LGBTQ community, whether you're gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual, the first thing they automatically go to is, oh, well, have you slept with a man? Have you slept with a woman? How do you know you're attracted to them if you haven't slept with them? So there's already that connection between attraction and sex. That I have to have sex to be able to feel attracted to this person.
And then you're automatically dismissed. Your feelings are like, well, you don't really know what you're feeling.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which then makes you feel it's like being gaslit. You feel like, wait, I can't trust my own perceptions here. There must be something wrong with me. That leads to more of that shame and that cycle. And then all that comes with that. The isolation, the self-loathing, it's horrible. Yeah.
And it's also this unique position, especially with gay men, that a lot of the venues that we go to caters to sex in one way or the other. And it could even be nuanced that we don't realize that it's happening, but it is still very present. It unknowingly perpetuates that sex has to get connected with gay men.
Right. So it puts those together instead of seeing the whole picture, the humanity. Yeah. It's this one component that gets isolated and also perpetuated by our culture around sex and sexuality and the fear of sex and the concern of sex.
Yeah. And I think it even goes, especially with gay men, back in the 80s and the early 90s when HIV and AIDS were a really big contributor to the community dying. It then perpetuates it a little more because there's that added layer of stress to it, especially, throughout the years, not just HIV AIDS in the 70s, but throughout the whole 1900s, we see a bunch of laws being passed from New York all the way out here to Southern California, which pushed a lot of gay men into the shadows. It pushed the sex that they have, it made that connection between identity and sex. And then what it did is that those two connectors are not good enough to be in the light. You shouldn't be acknowledging them. So we're going to push you into the shadows. You're going to get pushed into the cruising areas and stuff like that. And then the only safe spaces that you have for sex, we're also going to put police there to be able to arrest and have a consequence to the sex you're having.
Yeah. which is terrifying and scary and overwhelming. I mean, when you think about it from that lens, it's just like how awful, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a unique situation, and there's always this when I see patients who are gay men and they have this compulsive sexuality or the sex addiction, it's always this fighting thoughts that they have. It's on one hand, they know there's a problem, that it affects their finances, it affects their day to day. They can't hold a healthy relationship. But on the other end of it, they're also being told that there's nothing wrong, that they are just horny gay men, or they're just hypersexual. And so there's this, like you said before, there's this gaslighting moments where they know that there's something off with the sex that they're having, but they're being gaslit to believe that they don't have a problem.
So let's jump back a little bit and define compulsive sexuality or out of control sexual behavior or sex addiction or whatever language we want to use there. Let's define that a little clearer and then go into that for gay men and what that might be.
Yeah. So I always, when I speak with a patient who's coming in for an intake, I usually tell them that compulsive sexuality, compulsive sexual behaviors, sex addiction is not the amount of sex they're having, because who am I to say they're having too much or too little sex? I tell them it depends on the motive behind the sex that they're having. If the motive is to repress emotions, they feel angry, they feel lonely, they feel sad, and their first coping mechanism is sex or porn, that is a little problematic because it doesn't always have the greatest opportunity to relieve those emotions. If it is impacting the types of relationships they have, so instead of building relationships, it's creating greater isolation, then that's usually a hallmark of problematic sexual behavior that could be not so fulfilling. And that's also another hallmark, is the fulfillment of it. If they feel like they want to go out, have sex, and they feel angry from the day and they go out and go hook up, but they don't feel fulfilled at the end of it, and that's, it didn't do its job, quote unquote job, I guess.
Right. So sex in a way is being co-opted as a coping mechanism, as a primary way of dealing with emotional pain.
Yeah.
And then if that is used exclusively, compulsively, I mean, at times in our life, sex can serve as an escape or, a feeling, I guess, certain feelings we can have and we can use sex as a way to deal with that occasionally. I mean, that's part of being human.
Yeah.
But then if we're using it compulsively, we're continuing to use sex in a way that actually creates more harm in our life. That's when we start to look at like problematic sexual behavior.
Yeah. And for gay men, it adds an extra layer, because what it tends to also sometimes do is it adds in that internalized homophobia. So the only reason why they're having these compulsive sexual urges or this hypersexuality, some people tend to post it on the fact that they're gay. They're a gay man. So they will then fall into a cycle where they have the compulsive, the unfulfilling sex, the coping sexual experience, and they feel the shame and the guilt, and they turn it inwards on their identity, and then it perpetuates that cycle.
Let's talk more about that internalized homophobia and what that means, and how does that manifest itself in a gay person's life?
Yeah. So internalized homophobia is that internalizing. So, homophobia is the stigmas, the biases that we feel in our day to day. And instead of allowing it just to sit in that space with that other person, the person who's spewing the homophobia, who's saying those homophobic remarks, what the internalized homophobia tends to do is you take it in and you integrate it in your identity. And so there's certain aspects like, making sure that you don't walk out of your house and you're too feminine. You're not too masculine, so you're not going against who you are, but you don't want to be clocked as too feminine, because then you're definitely going to get called out on the streets. People are going to say something. People are going to look at you. And And what it tends to do is it creates that shame for being, who you really are.
Right. And you've got to hide yourself. I mean, it would take so much to manage that expectation of how the world is supposed to see you. And the reality is that in our society, there are places where it can be dangerous. I mean, you have to do that, which is really sad.
Yeah. And it then again goes back to that concept where we are constantly getting pushed into the shadows. If we are too close to the light where people can see us, we subject ourselves to the potential homophobia, the homophobic remarks, the catcalling and all of that people tend to experience out in the world. And it then pushes us closer into the shadows.
Right. And more you have to be hidden. Another question I have is about, you were talking earlier about how your attraction is connected to your sexuality. And I'm wondering about, for gay men, how those things also in that internalized homophobia get linked together. Like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how does that start to manifest in behavior that might not be really life affirming to them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think for that piece, it all depends on where people are looking for connections. There are a lot of mobile applications that tend to help gay men form these connections. However, for some reason, all of these application platforms and stuff like that turn towards sex. So you go, one of the biggest ones here in the States is Grindr. They advertise themselves as a connection-making app. And hookups is a piece of it, but it doesn't really prompt itself as that. And so someone who wants to build the connection, who just moved to the bigger city and wants to make those connections, they go into the app expecting to make connections, and then they're flooded with sexualization and stuff like that, and having sex in the forefront of the app. And this is true for not just Grindr, but a bunch of mobile applications. And there's currently more being made and more developing, and even locations because of that are starting to get influenced. You go to the bars out here in West Hollywood, and you sit there and, you're just trying to make a connection. The first thing someone says is, "I'm not looking to hook up."
Right.
And someone's just saying, they're like, "I'm just trying to make conversation." That wasn't even the forefront of my mind. So
in some ways, you're talking about making relationship connection really important in this process. But in the culture, sex can become also like the dominant force in the gay community in that process. And it's a combination of all these things that kind of come together to create that. And then someone who's struggling with their sexual behavior then comes to you, and you're working with all of these issues at once. Yeah, it's a culmination of all of these issues. And it's also that conflation of the two. They conflate the healthy relationship with a sexual relationship. And instead of the sexual relationship being a piece of the healthy relationship, it tends to take up more space than what it should be or what it needs to. And it tends to define the relationship. Right. And then the relationship suffers because of that. Yeah, it turns into a relationship that is based off of addiction, compulsions, and stuff like that. And like I mentioned before, it is that isolating factor. Instead of allowing that person to take that, gay man in this instance, to take a step forward into the relationship, they take a step back. Right. Right. So how do you start to help somebody? They come into your office and they start talking with you about this. And then what do you do? How do you help them? Yeah, a lot of it in the very beginning is a lot of validating. It's a lot of validating. It's a lot of affirming, because I want them to know, like we talked before, they get gaslit into believing that there's not a problem because of the culture of gay men and things like that. And what we are almost primed to believe in, it
it's disorientating to a lot of my patients. So it's
Can you define that like a little bit more, like what we're primed to believe in? Like what's the belief there?
Yeah. So we are, gay men specifically, we are primed to believe that we are hypersexual. You're supposed to be having a lot of sex. You're supposed to be having multiple sex partners. You're supposed to be a horny man, I think, not just within our community, but we can see it in media too. A lot of media portrayals in movies and TV shows and stuff like that kind of uphold that. So it automatically applies to when you see a gay man, you're like, oh, he's having a bunch of sex. He's supposed to do that because that's what I saw in this movie or this TV show. This character did also.
And then if you're a gay man and then you're not doing that, then what does that mean?
You get the number one phrase that some people like to use is, are you even gay, or what kind of gay are you? If you don't
what
do
kind
this.
of gay are you? Wow.
Yeah, it makes you seem, it tends to other you if you're not falling in line and or subscribing to a lot of the ideologies. One example is if, especially, I don't know if it's recently or something, but I've been getting a lot of patients who want open relationships, and that seems to be kind of like the fad. And so if you don't want that, or you don't want this kind of agreement to be promiscuous or, form those other relationships, then you're not considered a quote unquote good gay, also is what I've been hearing.
So not only from outside the community, you face this pressure to conform to heterosexual ideology, then internally in the community, you can also get pressure to conform to a certain ideology or idea of what goodness is, or a good person, or whatever.
It's this constant tug of war between trying to fit in enough so you don't get chastised by the heteronormative community, but you also want to conform a little bit to the gay community so that you're not isolated or chastised by them either. And it's trying to find that sweet spot between it, but also trying to stay true to yourself.
That is a balancing act. I mean, that's really hard. So how do you start to do that? How do you start to find that path?
Yeah, the path is very unique to everyone. And it's, really finding out what my patients' ideologies are. How do you see yourself as a gay man? What does it mean for you to identify as a gay man? What do you want your relationships to be? And, some of my patients do. They want that open relationship, that open intimacy kind of relationship where they build a really strong foundation with a primary partner and then be able to look for usually sexual intimacy outside, but they know they have that go-to strong foundation of intimacy with their primary partner. Others, it is that I just want to be monogamous, and how do I swim in this sea of open relationships to find another monogamous partner? And so it's really defining what does it mean for my patients, and how do we create the boundaries around their identity? Yeah.
And I would imagine too, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how this is about listening to your internal value system. Like what do I want in my life? What's right for me? And how do I put aside all of these external forces that are telling me to be this or to be that or to be this way or that way, to really listen to yourself. But that's so hard to do, especially when we have trauma, I think, for anybody.
Yeah, it is this, what tends to happen is the background white noise starts overpowering our own voices. It starts, actually what it tends to start doing is mimic us. And so when we hear it, we're like, that doesn't sound right, but doesn't sound too far off because that's what I'm supposed to like, or that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. How do we start to find our true voice, I guess, find our true self in this milieu of all these things telling us how to show up in the world?
Yeah, a lot of it, in the very beginning, I think you mentioned it, is that trauma work. Working with the traumas, working with those identity wounds, those childhood projection wounds that we tend to get at some point in our developments, and start working on those, because those are the hindrances. Most of us, some of us, we tend to have that acceptance wound somewhere within our childhood, because we were told that we shouldn't be gay, you shouldn't be liking boys like that, you shouldn't be that close to boys. And it's even when we do start getting male to male bonds are really essential in high school, because it helps us form those social groups and stuff like that. But we always have to be careful not to get too close. We can't be too close, because then that's when the bullying tends to start. We can't be too effeminate, because that's when the bullying tends to start. Or if we do take a step too close to another male person in our social group, we then get rejected, because we don't know exactly if they feel the same thing, and in all these other situations that tend to go through a teenager's head, and it creates a wound every single time.
Yeah, it's like that complex trauma shaping over time.
Yeah,
where you experience these kind of rejections or fears of rejection over and over again. You try and operate in that. I mean, I think we all want connection. We all want to be close to other human beings. I mean, we're social animals. And then to have to try and navigate it through this lens where you can't really be yourself, but you're trying to be yourself that has to be traumatic to a young person growing up in that world. I mean, how complex that is.
Yeah. And then if you add into it, so say you do find a person who is, you go on a date with another man. As a gay man, you go on a date with another gay man. And now there's two of you together. Now you don't just have to do a balancing act for yourself, but you have to also do a balancing act for the other person. Because you necessarily don't know what their traumas are, but you know what yours could be. So you're dancing around your own plus whatever theirs are. And it's this trauma dance that we tend to do with each other until we can find like that even middle ground to recognize, no, we're safe with each other.
Right. We're safe. We're going to be okay with each other.
Yeah.
And then what's really kind of breaks my heart in that statement too is we're safe with each other, but then the world is not safe. And that in a way breaks my heart too, because you find this other person, but then you both have to be really careful how that is expressed if you're in a place that isn't safe.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely interesting, especially where we are in Southern California, to go across almost like city lines. And you can tell the difference between, two men holding hands is accepted here in Los Angeles and in Palm Springs, but you go a little more north towards like the Grapevine and up there a little bit, and it starts getting into like a little bit of tricky territory. And you're like, is this accepted
you have to navigate
here?
That.
Is this not? Yeah, and it's an interesting place to be.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit, as you're working with these individuals and they start to find themselves and they start to listen to their own values, what are the next steps? What are they starting to do? And they're starting to look at their sexuality and they're starting to say, okay, this is problematic. This isn't, where does that go?
Yeah. So after I help patients find their true voice, the next steps are boundary work. So, what is your voice? Now, what are we going to do to be able to protect your voice and make sure that other people do not mimic you, do not try to sound you out, try to silence you. So we create a lot of boundaries around it. What do those boundaries look like? Who do we tend to not apply our boundaries to? Who do we tend to strengthen our boundaries around? And we start really maintaining a safe zone within themselves for their voice, and letting the people in who will help them enhance their voice and not diminish it. And that usually can be difficult depending on the culture of the friend group. We have the broader societal culture, and then that tends to influence social groups or friend groups. And how does that group like boundaries? What do the members of that friend group know about their boundaries? How do they cross other people's boundaries? So it's a dance to figure out boundary work.
And it's a journey, right? As you're describing this, I'm imagining this takes some time because first you have to come in and say, look, I think I have an issue here. I'm not feeling good about how sex is showing up in my life and it's causing me problems. And I got to work on that. And then I got to work through all these issues. And then I've got to really sit and learn to listen to myself to find my way. That's challenging work. That takes a lot of support.
It's challenging and it can be very scary because what we tend to do sometimes is we adhere to friend groups that help us. And especially if you are in this state of using sex to help cope with negative emotions, you are triggered by traumas, and this friend group is not in the best way helping you deal with those triggers. And as a person starts healing, as a gay man starts healing, they have to start looking at their groups and see, is this a healthy relationship? And then there's that stigma of breaking off the friend group of what are they going to think about me? If we all have the same social circles, what's going to happen to me now? How am I going to get further isolated? So there's a fear in there too.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense when we start to really listen to ourselves and start to try and grow in the direction we want. We're going to face these things that they're difficult. They're difficult to manage. I mean, there's so many moving parts. So as people move through this, where do they end up on this journey?
They always end up in a place of feeling confident about themselves. As we start working through their inner voices and setting the boundaries, and they start implementing those changes, they start following through with the things that we work on in our sessions, I usually see in my patients that they start becoming a lot more confident. They become confident in their ability to decision make, in understanding what is healthy, what isn't healthy, and really making that change to make sure only healthy relationships or healthy interactions are around them. And they usually then walk in or show up in Zoom and they're really excited to let me know what they were able to do between sessions and be able to feel proud in what they did.
They start to live congruently. Like with their own values. I mean, I think when any of us get to do that, we start to feel good about ourselves. Our self-compassion and self-esteem start to rise. We start to feel good about where we are in our life, even if it's difficult, even if it's challenging, we're able to start to thrive in that on a deep level. And that's really exciting.
It is. It's really exciting to have a patient who walks in and is very confused, who doesn't know what direction they're going to go into, and then to see the patient do the complete 180 because they are confident. They have that congruency with their environment and what they feel inside, and they're able to maintain that. And even if it falters a little bit, they know how to course correct and be able to stay in that state. It's really great to see.
Yeah, it's awesome to see people get better, find themselves, and pursue the life they want. And like I always say, you help that one person, but then their influence spreads out to other people in their life too that they interact with, and I think it helps other people start that healing journey if they need that. Yeah,
it's this. I think I've actually heard this from you that it takes one wrench in a relationship. You throw in that one wrench and the whole system has to change once you throw it in. And it's really great when, my patient is the wrench. They're able to kind of go into their social circles, go into their friend groups and say, no, I'm not going to participate. And it changes, the whole group has two choices. They have to shape up or ship out.
Yeah.
And because, of that, even if it is a little fear-based that, I don't want to be alone, what are they going to think of me if I walk out? They normally tend to shape up. And if they ship out, it's not their time to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So before we end, I always like to ask one question of anybody who comes on the podcast. And that's maybe someone is listening to this podcast, they're out there and they're struggling in some of these situations what would you want them to know? What would you want to say to them? If you could tell them one thing.
If I had one thing to say to someone who's experiencing what we've talked about today, I would let them know they're not alone. You're not alone. You have people who are here to support you, and you can make the change you want to make. It may be a little hard, but it's definitely doable, and it's definitely a space to be in to make that change.
Awesome. So reach out for help. Get support.
I'm here for anyone
alone.
who needs it.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you so much. And we'll put a link to your profile at theaddictedmind.com so people can check it out there. Thank you, Brandon, for coming on. And
of course,
for people out there listening, working at Novus, my group practice, and being a clinician here and helping all of these clients come in. I love it. I love working with you. And thank you for being a part of that.
Thank you, Duane. No, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate working with you because every single time we meet, I always learn something new. So it's amazing.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Addicted Mind podcast. As usual, all the links will be in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com. So check them out. If you got a lot out of this episode, share it with a friend and write us a review in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. That would be awesome. So here's a review from Jackson. Thank you, Jackson. I love this podcast. So I just recently started this podcast, and man, it is so amazing. I have learned so much and enjoyed it so much. I have been clean for almost 90 days, and this has truly helped me stay that way. The stories are really good, and I love the different topics and the heartfelt stories, and I can relate to almost all of them. Thanks so much to everyone who is a part of this podcast. I am truly blessed to have found it. Oh, thank you, Jackson. I really appreciate you taking the time to write that review. That means a lot to me. I'm glad. Keep up the good work. Keep going. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.